When wealth becomes influence. Here's where the story becomes especially interesting. Once these fortunes reached an unprecedented scale, their influence naturally expanded beyond business. Industrialists funded universities, libraries, museums, hospitals, scientific research, churches, political campaigns, newspapers, charitable foundations. Some viewed these men as visionary builders, while others saw ruthless monopolists. History still debates those questions today. But regardless of where one comes down on that debate, one fact is difficult to dispute. The scale of influence extended far beyond the products they sold. Steel companies no longer simply produced steel. Oil companies no longer simply refined petroleum. Railroad companies no longer simply transported freight. These organizations increasingly shaped education, finance, politics, public policy, and even how Americans understood progress itself. Something fundamentally new had entered history. Organizations whose power could outlast their founders. Organizations capable of influencing nearly every aspect of American life. The question was no longer whether corporations could become powerful. What happens when they do? More than inventions. It's very tempting to tell this story as one of heroes and villains. Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, Cornelius Vanderbilt, J.P. Morgan. Depending on which history book you read, they're either celebrated as visionary entrepreneurs who built modern America or condemned as robber barons who accumulated enormous fortunes while exploiting workers and crushing competitors. The truth, as is often the case in history, is probably more complicated. These men did not invent ambition. They didn't invent competition. They didn't invent the desire to build wealth. Those motivations have existed throughout human history. What changed were the tools available to them. Railroads allowed businesses to operate on a continental scale. Steel allowed cities and industries to grow in ways that had never been possible. Oil supplied an almost limitless source of inexpensive energy. Technology expanded what was possible. And when what is possible expands, institutions expand with it. The rise of the modern corporation. For thousands of years, most businesses remained tied to the lives of the people who owned them. A craftsman retired. The business disappeared. A merchant died. The enterprise often disappeared with them. The Industrial Revolution changed all of that. Corporations could now outlive their founders, raise enormous amounts of capital, hire professional managers, acquire competitors, own property across multiple states, influence legislation, shape entire industries. The corporation became something quite remarkable, not because it possessed consciousness, but because it possessed continuity. Individuals came and went. The institution remained. One generation of executives retired and another took their place. Shareholders changed, directors changed, employees even changed, but the organization continued pursuing the same objective: growth, expansion, survival. Over time, the institution itself became the enduring actor. In many ways, it began behaving almost like a living organism, not alive in the biological sense, but persistent, adaptive, resilient, always responding to incentives, always seeking opportunities, always finding new ways to survive. A different way of looking at history. One of the themes we've been exploring throughout Ambiology is that history often looks very different depending on where we choose to focus our attention. We're taught to think in terms of elections, political parties, presidents, wars, individual personalities. Those stories certainly matter, but sometimes they cause us to overlook slower, more powerful forces, technological change, economic incentives, institutional evolution. Those forces rarely make headlines. They don't fit neatly into election cycles. They don't divide cleanly into left versus right. Yet they often reshape society more profoundly than any individual leader ever could. That's why understanding this period matters. The first Gilded Age wasn't simply an era of enormous wealth. It was the birth of institutions that would increasingly influence nearly every aspect of American life. Industry, finance, education, medicine, media, politics, and eventually, even the way we think.